Hello everybody. We are going to get started in this webinar presented to you from Five9 Software and StarWind. We're going to be covering best practices for deploying your new Hyper-V infrastructure. I'm Simon Perriman, Vice President of Business Development, and I'll be joined by Max Kolometchev, who is joining us from StarWind. Max is the Director of Product Management over at StarWind and has over 10 years of experience with engineering, developing products and solutions not just for Hyper-V, but also for VMware. As an experienced IT professional, he's done real-world deployments, as well as doing all of the design and a lot of architecture for StarWind and their line of technologies. You can also find Max as a very active Spiceworks community member by contributing under Max at StarWind. I'm Simon Perriman. I'm Five9's Vice President of Business Development. Previously, I spent about 8 years with Microsoft as a senior technical evangelist, covering all of the data center technologies, but of course specializing on Hyper-V. I spent about 4 years on the Hyper-V engineering team before I moved into that role, so I have lots of deep technical experience in the product, and I'm also a VMware certified professional as well. So for those that are watching this webinar may be new to Hyper-V, but experienced with VMware, we're also going to try to give you a few comparisons to help you understand that transition. You could contact me, Simon Perriman, on the Twitter handle. With that, we want to go through a variety of best practices. First, taking a look at the hardware, leveraging StarWind's expertise with the physical components, and then taking a look at the management best practices, seeing where Five9's expertise come in with their own management platform. We're going to show you several resources and also have a discussion.
Today we are going to talk about Hyper-V deployment best practices, and I'm going to run you through small caveats everyone may have thought about, but when it comes to a real-life deployment, those are the most obvious questions which are getting forgotten or just omitted. And while some things may be too obvious for you, you will be surprised about how many people actually don't ask those questions about their managers, their customers before implementing an infrastructure. But before that, I would like to talk a little bit about our company backend. We've been working on storage-centric software and solutions since 2001. First as Rocket Division software, and then at the end of 2008 we spinned off as StarWind. First it was StarWind software, now it's just StarWind, to keep it simple. We also do hardware solutions now, so it also makes more sense. We've got our main product, which is StarWind HyperConverged Appliance, with the allied products, StarWind Virtual SAN, StarWind VTL or Virtual Tape Library, and StarWind Storage Appliance. We've got about 250,000 users worldwide. Right now there are more than that because of the hardware. Some people are using and they don't even know that there is StarWind inside. Let's say Western Digital Sentinel boxes, which may be standing on your desk, but you didn't ever guess that StarWind's running inside. We're headquartered out of Boston, Massachusetts, and we've got our European headquarters in Tallinn, Estonia. There are more than 100 of employees right now. We do provide worldwide 24/7 support, and we also take care of hardware replacement using our hardware partners, so we can also replace the hardware within 4 hours if that is critical for your business. And we're also global alliance providers with all the major companies, not only Microsoft but also VMware and also Citrix, and we're also proud to be on the Intel Storage Builders list. Now, with that, less about us, more about Hyper-V deployments and what could go wrong with them. So first, the fundamentals. Every time the virtualization project starts, there are some questions which need to be asked 100%. Otherwise, the whole project may not run smooth or may end up in a very unexpected way. So first of all, you need to know what applications will you actually run on that platform. I've seen a lot of potential customers or even customers of other vendors saying that they are going to run Exchange, they are going to run their Active Directory print file and whatever else they want to run on the system. But at the end of the project, they offloaded most of the Office stuff to the Office 365. They virtualized the domain controller. They don't have the print server or file server because they also virtualized that, and they omitted some of the functionality to a NAS. And they ended up with an overpriced cluster which didn't really fit their needs because it was not something they originally designed. So make sure that you know for sure that the application set you have at the beginning of the project will make it to the end of the project. Otherwise, if you change the application set, that may be a really valid reason to change the hardware you're looking for or even the whole solution you're looking for. Then, the important question, one of the most important questions in such environments, if you know the applications, is what is the uptime requirement? The uptime requirement for one application, for all applications, or for certain ecosystems in the IT department. You may lose your print server for an hour or even a day, but what happens if you lose your databases? What happens if you lose your emails? You need to have answers for that. And you need to make sure you know how long it can be done and if it can be done at all. A more detailed question to that is RPO and RTO. RPO stands for Recovery Point Objective and RTO for Recovery Time Objective. Just a little bit about that. RPO, or Recovery Point Objective, is essentially the same as when was your last backup. If you back up on a daily basis, then your Recovery Point Objective is current time minus the time when the last backup was taken. So maybe yesterday, it may be 5 hours earlier, it may be 6 hours earlier. Recovery time objective is essentially your time to restore. So there are strict requirements in IT world, and there are companies who do not tolerate those numbers being more than 5 minutes. So make sure you're not in the short list, otherwise you're looking at a really robust IT infrastructure, and you may need a lot of advice and a lot of expertise to build that. And finally, what are the security and compliance requirements? When you're building a solution in medical or government organizations, there will be a lot of requirements which may change your hardware configurations, which may change your security configurations, and instantly strike out the majority of components you're using on a daily basis for SMBs. And there will be compliance requirements asking you to have your tapes archived for 5 years, to have your data available for NSA or any other organization for next 5 years or so. And you need to make sure that your solution is fit, because underestimating your data growth over 5 years may bring you to overspending with some parts of your IT infrastructure. That is also important. Now, once we've gone through the fundamentals, I'm going to speak to the part I consider one of the most important. This is one of the cornerstones of the IT. Storage. Nothing happens without storage. We all need to store our data somewhere. It's not 64 kilobytes for everyone these days. Average IT admin manages something like 56 terabytes of data, according to Gartner. I may have got the comma wrong, but that's still far beyond 1 terabyte anyway. How much primary storage do we need for our applications? Will that be all flash storage, or does it need to be a hybrid array? Then, a more important question, storage fault tolerance and HA requirements. You may have seen that on the previous slide as uptime requirements. Effectively, storage requirements and your uptime requirements are almost the same. If you still cannot answer that question, then we can simplify that. what will it cost your company's IT infrastructure to be down for a minute or an hour or a day? Just imagine that, try to bring up the numbers and discuss it with your management. If it's under $1,000 or $2,000 for a day of being down, then you may not need an HA solution. If those numbers become astronomical, make sure that those numbers are true. If those are true, plan for a true HA infrastructure. There is a good quote from John Nicholson on the bottom of the slide. So HA is not something you buy, it's something you do. And it cannot be more true than that, because building a reliable infrastructure not only requires you to buy components marked as HA or fault tolerant, it also means you're caring about the infrastructure, you built it the way it is redundant enough, it is foolproof, and it is fault tolerant on all levels. So even if power goes down, you still have the UPS. If UPS goes down, the systems shut down gracefully one after another, and so on. So there is a lot of planning behind the scenes for an actual HA project. Then, going to next question, how much storage for backup? You know your primary storage requirement and you know your approximate data sets, so you may anticipate certain backup requirements. Now, will that be a tape backup or a disk-based backup? And it may be the same disk-based backup or tape-based backup, but in the cloud. Clouds are getting more and more popular these days, and a lot of people are moving their entire infrastructures off to Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, so that may be a huge consideration as well. And finally, what are the growth expectations? You know that you need 4 terabytes today, but what will the storage requirement be in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, or effectively throughout the hardware or the whole solution life cycle you planned on paper? This is something you need to thoroughly plan to make sure that you don't stand in front of your management in a year saying, well, we didn't actually want it to grow that big, or we didn't anticipate that. So that is also important. Now, going next slide, we're talking about actual servers. I've put dual socket, single socket, and number of cores first. That may be unobvious, and right now most people would say, well, I will take all the cores I need for this project and make sure I have a huge power reserve for that. But here's the thing. You may have your DPAC or any other performance analyzer run correctly, and you know how many cores you need. But as Windows 2016 comes out, it will be licensed on per core basis. So you will have to balance your spendings not only based on number of sockets, but based on number of cores. And those people who previously thought that having 50% or even 60% core overhead just in case will not have to justify that just in case to their management, because that will translate into higher spendings with 2016 server licensing as soon as it is released and you want to upgrade. Then amount of RAM and what type of DIMMs do you use? Obviously, the right amount of RAM, the one you've been told by your performance or capacity analyzing tools, but there are small tricks which may be obvious, but I was really surprised when 3 people in a row told me, wow, I didn't think about putting in 32 gigabyte DIMMs because I could expand more later. So just a small trick. I will be really glad if everyone knows those small tricks, but just putting it out there. The bigger you go, the easier it is to scale your machine up to more RAM in the future. So you don't have to take out the 16 gigabyte or 32 gigabyte DIMMs later on, sell them on eBay, and then buy the bigger ones and refill the machine. You can just add them with the same capacity DIMMs later on. Then we come to a huge discussion topic, which is disks, chips, cards, and tapes. Effectively, all the storage you can put in the systems. Now, obviously, with RAM, there will be a bigger discussion than that. With storage, I'm just going to surface touch that topic, because if you dive in there, you may have seen those oceanic researches from the deep sea, 7 kilometers deep. So it's a huge topic which deserves a series of separate webinars. I'm not going to dive deep into that. Storage needs to be fit for the task, and when you're virtualizing, make sure you're avoiding main caveat with the spindle disks, which is RAID 5, unless your I/O profile is under 500 IOPS. If you're well under 5,000, well over 5,000 IOPS, I would consider using SSDs, because those are getting ridiculously cheap these days and give you guaranteed performance. And of course, if you need top-notch performance with more than 100,000 IOPS for a single consumer, that means that NVMe is the way to go. Luckily, I'll tell you later about NVMe and how StarWind handles that. Then, networking. These days, 10 gigabit becomes a commodity, and 10 gigabit switches finally got to a point where those are affordable. And a lot of people are even considering converged 40 gigabit Ethernet to make sure their infrastructure is future-proof. I would recommend getting a mixture of 10 gigabit, and if you're really performance-centric and you consider more than 200,000 IOPS spinning around in your infrastructure, to get a 40 gigabit NIC. It's not so expensive, and you can also use VLANs to just have your management and your production traffic just inside without having too many wires between the boxes. Then, PSUs, mostly redundant unless you're building a really small configuration and you're making it redundant on the server level. And obviously UPS units, and making sure that you connect systems to the UPS properly and make sure that they shut down one after the other. And of course, warranty and service options. If you are building an HA environment which can lose up to 4 drives and still be operational, or you can lose 1 server and 1 drive and still be operational, just make sure you recalculate your real support needs. And if you really need that expensive support contract with 4-hour parts replacement day or night. Then, going to the Hyper-V elements, there is a really great article on TechNet. It's a huge article, but I just wanted to bring some of the items from it to your attention. First question, full-blown Windows or just the core version? So, core version may seem hard to manage, but on the other hand, we've got 5.9. 5.9 covers all your day-to-day management requirements, so you shouldn't be afraid of the core version. And core version also has less components. Less components means less moving parts, and also means less updates. And less updates translates into faster maintenance. So that is actually something not all people recognize in the core version, and it gives it a lot of credit. Then, drivers, firmware, and updates. Always make sure you install latest and greatest. Just make sure that those are not problematic. You cannot always find the good release notes for the drivers, but make sure you read them. It's a lot of reading, I know, but oftentimes we got our newest and greatest test configurations just not working properly because we didn't read through the release notes, and the obviously stated it won't work in your configuration. So it's worth it. Roles and features, if it's a Hyper-V cluster, just leave it with the as small features as you can. So it will be the Hyper-V, the failover clustering, the multipathing, and I guess that's it. Everything else can be virtualized, and just make sure you're not installing any database software right on the hypervisor. That's once you can do it, but you will not like the results. Let's put it this way. And of course, as for additional software on the host, from what I've seen in 10 years practice, I've seen antivirus. Here and there, I've seen some management tools. These days, I only see StarWind 5.9 and sometimes some Veeam stuff running on the host itself. Everything else runs inside virtual machines, and it's better to have it inside a virtual machine. So make sure that the host is actually the hypervisor and not a application server plus hypervisor. A small note about networking. If you're building a hyperconverged environment, it really makes sense to segregate your storage NICs and production management NICs. After all, even though it's virtual SAN, it is still a SAN, so it's a good idea to have those networks segregated. Also, jumbo frames is something you want to enable for the migration networks as well as for the storage networks. It improves performance and it improves latency as well. Teaming, if you're using iSCSI, teaming is not supported. Microsoft has released a lot of material on that, but it's still a little bit contradictory. Most people conclude that teaming is not the best way to treat your storage, but if we're talking about management or production traffic, it's completely fine to team your networks there. Just make sure that teaming is not in the storage realm. If it's storage, it's multipathing. If it's not, it can be teaming. So an easy separation. Now, I talked a lot about most components. Just a few small remarks about the cluster itself. We've got our typical 2-node and 3-node cluster deployments. Make sure you read through the witness for the cluster recommendations, because that is the thing which protects your cluster from split brain and from catastrophic failures. With 2 nodes, you may want to get a disk witness. With 3 nodes, one of the nodes is the witness, and there are other witness programs or modes available. I would recommend to read that, especially if you have a geo-separated cluster. So let's say 2 nodes in one building and 1 node in other building. Microsoft has some specific recommendations for those cases, so make sure to read those in the witness configuration wizard. Then, virtual machine storage, or so-called cluster shared volumes. You may have heard that Hyper-V recommended having a CSV for each virtual machine workload type for quite some time. If we are talking the hyperconverged environment, it is 1 cluster shared volume per node. That gives you the best performance. And also make sure that I/O is local and doesn't go to the network. If you have a dedicated SAN, it is still recommended to have 1 cluster shared volume per workload type. Divide et impera, which is Latin for divide and rule, is just a recommendation to make sure you look at your networks not only on the physical host level, but also on the hypervisor and on the cluster level. It may be a little complicated with Hyper-V, as it's not only a hypervisor but also an operating system. But when you're in the cluster, make sure that your cluster does not try to push traffic down the storage networks, and it does it through the correct networks. And also make sure that live migration is happening on the right network. So it's something to keep in mind and put it as a separate checklist item when deploying the cluster. A lot of bad things happen later down the road if that is not configured properly. Now, I've discussed most of the small caveats of a do-it-yourself Hyper-V cluster. And I just wanted to quick mention that StarWind is also doing what we call an all-in-one solution for StarWind HCA. And that has some significant benefits compared to other hyperconverged solutions or even do-it-yourself rigs. First of all, we have already implemented all those best practices I told you about and more than that. So our solutions come pre-tested and pre-configured and already fitting all the best practices. Also, they're exceptionally easy to manage because you don't need to keep an eye out for all those little settings. We already configured all networking, storage, cluster, and hypervisor components. You just need to see Five9 Manager, love it, and manage your applications and don't think about the backend infrastructure running those. And it is also cost efficient because we do it at bigger scale because we have major hardware and software partners like, let's say, Five9 or Intel or Dell. We can do a full-blown solution with us as single point of support, and that will be more cost-effective than buying the components separately and purchasing all the services and spending your time, which also translates into money, not for you, but maybe for your management. So we provide that as a cost-effective and affordable solution for any business. Now, I'm going to advance a little faster here. The concept we typically take with hyperconvergence is omitting a physical dedicated SAN. Instead of having that proprietary storage fabric, we use the local storage in the servers to give us better performance, easier management, and also better flexibility. We're using StarWind Virtual SAN to be the data mover of our appliance. It will take ownership of the local storage resources on the nodes and mirror them between the hosts, and then present those back to the host as highly available storage resource. This is the foundation for building an HA production environment, and we use it for all hyperconverged appliance deployments. Now, the whole virtualization product and actual solution is not worth a penny without a good plan B. And plan B in our case is presented by Veeam, being part of the solution and being responsible for all the backup recovery, replication, and data loss avoidance. I'm not sure I need to talk a lot about Veeam. It's an industry standard backup tool. The only thing I would like to mention, we have integrated Veeam together with Five9 into a unified management. So we really have that single pane of glass to manage both virtual machines and their backup, as well as the storage behind the scenes. And finally, our solution we provide as a opponent to do it yourself is more scalable than majority of the hyperconverged appliances. So we not only allow you to scale out, we also allow you to scale up and do that independently. So you can add more storage, you can add more RAM to the systems, you can also add more nodes if you need more nodes. And of course you can mix those two approaches together by adding more storage to some nodes of the cluster and adding more storage to all nodes of the cluster and also adding components. So something not all hyperconverged vendors will allow you to do. And finally, the whole solution is supported by StarWind. So we not only provide hardware support or storage support, StarWind acts as a single throat to choke for the entire solution, and we make sure that you get the best customer service ever. And we also make sure that we never get into a finger-pointing scenario. because that is the most painful thing in a multi-component environment where hypervisor vendor says it's storage, storage vendor says it's the drivers, and customer is not happy. Customer wants his problem solved. And our support goal is to get any possible problem solved and to make sure that your HA environment is truly HA and working 100% of time, or 99.59s or 69s. However you'd like it. The 7th 9 depends on you. And with that, I would like to finish my part. Simon, it's your turn.
Let's go ahead and talk about management best practices as we focus on 5.9 Manager. First, a little bit about 5.9. We were founded back in 2009 when Hyper-V was first introduced. So unlike many other organizations, we exclusively build technologies for Hyper-V. So this means that we generally have better integration, performance, and optimizations, as we're really focused on doing the right thing exclusively for the Hyper-V platform. We're headquartered in Chicago and now have staff in 24 regions worldwide, including 17 Microsoft MVPs that are part of our extended team. With over 100,000 Hyper-V users globally, we are protecting and helping manage companies and data centers of all sizes. In addition to the management product, which we're going to be focusing on in this presentation, we also have an agentless security product that allows you to offer antivirus, intrusion detection, firewall, and network scanning for a Hyper-V environment without having to have install agents inside your virtual machines. Additionally, we have a VMware to Hyper-V migration tool, the V2V Easy Converter, which is a free utility allowing you to copy VMware virtual machines over to Hyper-V. Here's a map showing our global presence. Again, you can see that we are headquartered in Chicago with a strong presence in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Over the next year, we plan to continue our expansion throughout Asia and Latin America. 5.9 Manager itself is what we've been focused on as our easy, centralized, and affordable management and monitoring solution for Hyper-V. What we found was that Microsoft has left a deficit when it comes to graphical management. There's really two extremes that Microsoft offers themselves, where you have the inbox tools provided by Windows Server, which contain things such as Server Manager, Hyper-V Manager, Failover Cluster Manager. However, you have to go to multiple different interfaces that often don't have any type of consistency to perform simple tasks. On the other side of that, you have System Center, Microsoft's Enterprise Management Suite. This is a great product, however, it's pretty expensive, often doubling your licensing costs, and it's a very heavyweight system. You usually have to have dedicated hardware just to run the management infrastructure, which is distributed across up to a dozen different virtual machines, including dedicated SQL servers. So most SMBs are unsuccessful when it comes to deploying that up, if they really only need to manage a couple of dozen hosts. So this is where 5.9 Manager found our niche. We try to position ourselves as kind of the Goldilocks solution, where we're the right fit. We're not too small, we're not too big, we're just the right size. So with a single installation, we're easy to set up, easy to use, everything runs in a single console. So this is going to lower your training and support costs. Additionally, we have an interface which is designed like vCenter, so as a much more familiar experience for VMware administrators, it makes the transition over to Hyper-V much easier. We do have an antivirus edition as well, which contains the antivirus technologies available from our security product. However, due to scalability limitations, that version is limited only to 20 virtual machines a host. And if you wish to manage more VMs per host, you have to use the full version of 5.9 Cloud Security. Let's take a look at some of the features in more detail. The first best practice that we recommend is every morning when you get into the office, go take a look at the summary dashboard views. It's going to centrally report all of the interesting information at different levels for your virtualized infrastructure, breaking it down at the data center, cluster, host, and even virtual machine level. From this interface, you can see a quick visual summary of the health of the environment, the configuration, and whether there are any different types of errors or alerts which you have to pay attention to.
We did a lot of focus around health management as well. And if you're a large and growing company, we added automatic Hyper-V host discovery. And this allows you to basically query Active Directory, and it will give you a list of unmanaged Hyper-V hosts. From there, you can go and add them to your environment and start managing them all with Five9 Manager. As Max mentioned earlier, we also do GUI-based management for Server Core. And this was actually the original design of Five9 Manager. When Windows Server Core first came out in 2008 R2, there wasn't a good way to go and manage it, and there was not good remote connections. So the Five9 Manager graphic console will actually install on Server Core, so you can get a full GUI that runs directly on your Server Core box if you want. Now since then, the remoting capabilities have improved significantly, so not a lot of people still need to do that, but the option's available if you need. I think my favorite setting around host management is the ability to go and clone different configurations to your other hosts. And this is critical best practice. You want to make sure that all of your Hyper-V hosts are configured the same way each time. And here's why. When a virtual machine in a cluster moves from one host over to another host, it wants to have all the exact same configuration settings. The same names of the disks, the same names of the virtual networks, and all of those other Hyper-V configuration details. And the reason for this is when the virtual machine actually boots and comes online, it's going to go and read that Hyper-V configuration file. It's going to go and look for those networks that are on it. And so if you have misconfigured networks or different names on each host, it's not going to actually be able to start up and run. So the best practice here is go and configure your settings once on a host, and then go and clone them over to your other hosts. Now with Five9 Manager, we also support the latest versions of Hyper-V, including Windows Server 2016 with NanoServer. Now right now, since NanoServer Server 2016 has not been publicly released, our version is in beta only. We don't release pre-release software that's not supported by Microsoft yet. However, if you are actively using NanoServer and want to get a preview, please send our sales team or myself an email, and we'll be happy to give you access to one of our betas. Now, the best practices around virtual machine configuration are all rolled into this console as well. So you could do the traditional settings, create a virtual machine, install the integration services. And for those VMware people out there, integration services are kind of like VM tools. It allows the virtual machine to know that it is a virtual machine, so that the host can do things such as start, stop, reset, and manage the memory. One of the coolest features that a lot of people like within Five9, which isn't available anywhere else, is the ability to remotely set IP addresses, where you can simply click on a virtual machine, configure the IP addresses, and those get pushed inside the virtual machine itself. So you don't actually have to go and log into each and every virtual machine to go and do that configuration. And we support all of the different Hyper-V guest operating systems as well. This includes Windows Server, Windows Client, and the different Linux and Unix distributions. With our virtual machine management, we offer traditional steps that you would expect, starting and stopping the virtual machines. And we also give you a way to automatically clone and sysprep them, which some people consider some more advanced features. So if there's a good virtual machine, it's configured correctly, you want to make a copy of it so that you can scale it out, it's easy to do using a simple wizard. And as part of our wizard process, we also give users the ability to go and sysprep the virtual machine as you do it. Now, this is a good best practice to sysprep your virtual machines, because what sysprep does is it goes through a process known as genericizing the virtual machines, which basically strips out any uniquely identifying information, such as the names, the MAC addresses, IP addresses, other types of GUIDs. So this way, when you redeploy that cloned virtual machine, there's not going to be a conflict. It's not going to look like there's an identical one on the network, which causes configuration issues. You're still going to have the ability to get a nice, clean, running virtual machine that has the same settings, but is still unique for management. We support different types of connections, all the different types of live migration, including storage live migration. I'll give you a nice, easy way to actually go and filter the interface. Checkpoint support and Hyper-V replica support. And we'll touch on Hyper-V replication in a moment. With virtual network management, We just follow the same best practices provided by Hyper-V here, giving you the ability to configure 3 different types of networks, along with the different MAC addresses and VLAN IDs. Within Virtual Disk Management, a similar story for Hyper-V Manager, giving you kind of the same core functions. One thing that 5.9 does, which is a little different than the inbox tools, is give you access to a resource library. And a resource library essentially allows you to create a golden copy or a master copy of a virtual machine or a disk and reuse it multiple times. We'll go and take a look at the library in some more details in a moment as well. One of our most popular features, though, is our monitoring. This comes in the box. This is free. You don't need to go and purchase a separate product like Operations Manager to be able to monitor the health of your infrastructure. So using this, you can see real-time information about CPU, memory, disk, network, and your cluster shared volume disks. We have a lot of filtering built in. We give you the ability to set certain thresholds for when you see an alert. We build in trend lines, and we can even go and take a look at historical data as well, using our built-in database or SQL Express or even your own SQL version. So this means that when you come to work in the morning, if something's happened overnight, you can actually go back through time and try to identify the root cause of that problem, making troubleshooting significantly easier. We give you system status reports where you can automatically generate a PDF or Word doc or different file formats that give you detailed inventory about your different hosts or virtual machines. Now, if you're in the compliance realm, where you work with financials or legal or medical, being able to regularly report on the infrastructure configuration is a requirement for many of the different compliance standards out there. But this gives you a simple tool to do it. Simply select your host, run the report, and you're going to get very detailed information down to the individual property for every single host and virtual machine, making it much easier to run these reports once a week and save them for when you actually need them. We've also integrated several of the best practice analyzers available in Windows Server. Now, this is probably one of my favorite best practices for those that are new to Hyper-V, because when you go and build an environment or when you go and take an existing one, there's going to be a lot of different moving parts that you put together. Now, earlier in this session, Max walked you through quite a lot of these best practices, but sometimes it's hard to remember all of them. This tool is going to go help you out. And what this essentially does is it calls different built-in best practice analyzers that are already available in Windows Server, but are hidden throughout the product. Some of them are in Hyper-V Manager, some in File Server Manager, some in Cluster Manager, some in Server Manager. And what we've done is we've pulled them all together, placed them into our interface. So you go and run this task, and it actually gives you guided step-by-step on misconfigurations and what you need to do to solve them. So our best practice is go and run this tool once a week and continue to knock off different misconfigurations. Run it the next week and keep working down that list. Once you get to the point of no errors, you can guarantee that you've got a perfectly configured environment. Now, what's great about acquiring hardware from StarWind is they go through all of these best practices and all of these configurations themselves. So if you're working with StarWind, you're going to be starting with a great place with a lot of these, most of these already taken care of as well. We've also gone and integrated all of the different logs into this environment. Now, as you may know, Microsoft writes its event logs through its own event channel, ETW. That gets pushed in a different location, and navigating that can be kind of complicated because networking is in a different place than cluster, than storage, than virtualization. So what we did, we went through all of the different logs for Windows Server and aggregated those which are relevant for Hyper-V and clustering. So we pull them all together into a single interface, and from here you can filter based on severity, based on time, and several other different settings to help you go and analyze the different components within your logs. We've also integrated email alerts and event notifications. So this gives you a real-time notification when something changes in your environment that you may want to resolve. So this is great as a best practice because you don't have to even go and sit in front of your monitor or check for problems every couple of hours. Simply go and configure email alerts, connect it to your SMTP server, And then anytime something interesting in the environment happens, we go send you an alert, and you can go and actually analyze it as well.
Here we've switched over to the Five9 Manager interface, and what we're actually looking at here are the Five9 virtual labs. These are available to you if you visit the five9.com website, go to Resources, and select the Virtual Labs tab. This gives you a fully functioning lab environment where you can follow step-by-step instructions to complete specific tasks, or you can use this as a sandbox and explore the different features and technologies yourself. The first thing that we're taking a look at here is the summary view, where we can see that we can view information at the data center level, the cluster level, the host level, and even down to the individual virtual machine level, giving us useful functionality and information about all of the different components inside my environment. Next, I want to show you some of the features that we have around server management. So here we can go and select our Hyper-V settings, and we can go and configure different types of information, such as where we want to store our different resources, different migration settings, and even configure Hyper-V replication. Well, let's go ahead and quickly adjust one of these settings. Let's say, for example, I want to increase the number of simultaneous live migrations from 4 virtual machines to 6. I simply say apply. That makes the change on the local node, and then I can go and apply these same settings to other hosts in my environment. So if I want to go ahead and copy those same settings over to my domain controllers or over to an individual node, as I'll do in this case, I select copy migration settings, click apply, and then we can ensure that I have a consistent configuration across all of the different nodes in my data center, so that the virtual machine behaves the same way no matter where I'm running the task from. Let's go ahead and browse into some of the additional cluster settings here. So from here, I have the ability to go and validate or test my cluster. As I drill down into the cluster level, cluster depth, I can go ahead and actually pause and resume some of the nodes. This is some of the failover cluster functionality that we're going to be talking about in slides momentarily. I can deploy virtual machines, import them, change different settings, enable remote management to the host, and connect to it and perform standard operating tasks. Now at the node level as well, I can go and view an equivalent to what we would see with Hyper-V Manager, where we get a list of all of our running virtual machines. Now from here, I can go and connect to different virtual machines using different protocols. I can edit the settings of them, and you'll see an interface similar to what you get with Hyper-V Manager. From here, I can configure all of the different settings, such as dynamic memory, network settings, management settings, and everything else that you would expect when managing your virtual machine. I can start, shut down, and do standard operations to my VM, create checkpoints, move them with the migration, or even go and clone them with our clone, a virtual machine wizard. Down here I can also get information about replication, if that has been set up. As I move further, taking a look at this host, I can go and configure different types of virtual network settings and different types of extensions, such as MAC addresses, and even connected to things such as Five9 Virtual Firewall. We could go take a look at the monitoring settings, which gives us real-time and historic information about the infrastructure. From here, we can see our top contributors based on how they're using resources, and we can see different errors. We see our real-time monitoring with trend lines, and if we drill down into these tabs here, we can actually see our historic data as well, to see how different resources have been utilized. For example, we can break it down to the last month, last year, or even further, depending on how large our database is. From here, we'll go and quickly generate a system status report. What's essentially happening here is that we're going and running a query against all of the virtual machines on this particular node, and it's going to give us an inventory of how everything is set up. With this information, I have the ability to export it or to go and save it to different types of formats, so that I can go and copy it to, say, a SharePoint site, or go and send the information to some type of compliance or data server. Here we get information about the virtual machines and their settings for memory. As we scroll through, we get information about the disks, information about the networks, different states of the virtual machines, start and stop actions. As we go into this even further, we get settings for checkpoints, disk drive, and even integration configuration information. When we select our Best Practice Analyzer tab, we run a quick PowerShell query and pull the latest data from the Best Practice Analyzer. This will let us easily and quickly find different best practices that we can follow. And again, as the recommendation, run this once a week and continue to work through this list to go and try to figure out different ways that you can go and optimize this environment. As we look at the Hyper-V logs, you can see that these are pulled down covering key different settings for your logs, and from here you can filter and see different type of information that you may need to report on. Let's go ahead and switch to one of our specific virtual machines, and you'll see that this information is now reset to the per virtual machine level. So again, you can go and filter across all of these different levels.
So taking a look at the advanced management capabilities here, these are kind of things which you may find more interesting for larger organizations because these give you a whole bunch of automation tools to make things much easier. Now, one thing that's also been interesting is we found out that even Microsoft themselves use Five9 Manager to manage their own internal labs. Many people within Microsoft find System Center itself to be too complicated, or find Hyper-V Manager does not have all the tools in the same place. So we even have support directly from Microsoft using this within their own internal test labs to make management significantly easier. So as we go through our more advanced features, the first one to note is change tracking and user logging. This is also a benefit for people with compliance needs as well, because what we're doing here is continually tracking all of the actions which are performed on the infrastructure. This means that anytime an administrator makes a change or something automatically happens, such as a virtual machine is failed over, we go and inventory that, write that down, so that we can go and track everything. This is going to be extremely helpful if over time you notice things are changing, you see configuration drift, or if you have multiple administrators. It adds a lot of accountability, a lot of best practices for managing a large IT infrastructure and organization. We have also integrated support with Hyper-V Replica, and this is something which isn't even available within System Center VMM. Now what Hyper-V Replica does is it allows you to take a running virtual machine and take a copy of its virtual hard disk. Now, there are some limitations around this. It is only asynchronous replication, which means that we take a snapshot every 30 seconds or 5 minutes or 15 minutes and send that across. But this gives you a very easy disaster recovery solution. Now, if you only have a single data center and you don't think you can do disaster recovery, you can actually go and integrate Hyper-V Replica with a service provider and fail over to their data center, or you can go and integrate it with Azure, Microsoft's public cloud, and use a technology known as Azure Site Recovery that allows you to fail over to Azure itself. So a lot of different options that you can go and integrate with Hyper-V Replication. But we give you everything in the box, including the ability to go and configure your Hyper-V Replication settings, and then go and clone them to every other host in your cluster. We also give you the ability to configure the Hyper-V Replica broker on the cluster too. And the Hyper-V Replica broker is essentially a highly available replication engine. It's going to fail over and move between different cluster nodes to ensure that replication always happens. All of this integrated within Five9 Manager. Now, failover cluster management, as all of you guys have heard, can be quite a problem. Max gave us a lot of best practices earlier. Well, if you're able to combine StarWind with Five9 Manager, we're going to solve most of those problems for you. The cluster comes pre-configured. We have our built-in best practice analyzers, and you can manage it all from this single interface. So with Five9 Manager, you can create and manage your clusters. You can deploy and optimize your virtual machines. We've built in the cluster best practice analyzer, also known as the validation wizard, and you can do standard maintenance tasks like pausing nodes and resuming them if you need to have maintenance. We've also integrated load balancing, which we call the optimizer. With load balancing, we're distributing the virtual machines across different hosts based on load and based on capacity. And the whole idea here is that you don't want to go and overwhelm a single host. If you have multiple individual hosts or clusters in your environment, you can organize them together as a group. You can set different threshold settings, and if those thresholds get exceeded, we will automatically live migrate a virtual machine for you. In System Center VMM, this is known as dynamic optimization, and with VMware, this is known as distributed resource scheduling, or DRS. Essentially the same set of technologies here. We've recently added capacity planning as well. And as Max mentioned earlier, one of the best practices is to try to understand how much storage you actually need. Try to buy it up front so you do not run out of capacity later. And this is certainly an area where we can help you with our predictions. So based on your different utilization of storage and different resources, we'll actually develop trend lines and make prediction based on your current usage patterns of when we think you may be running out of space. We also have a resource and template library. We mentioned this briefly earlier, but this is where you can go and store all of these different resources that you may want to go and use multiple times. After you can even select an existing virtual machine and save it to a template. So if you've already had a nicely configured VM and you just want to save that to the library, we make it very easy to do. And we even give you the option to do a sysprep as you save it, so that as you're saving that information, it's also going to strip all of those uniquely identifying components. And from there, you can go and deploy multiple virtual machines.
Let's go and take a look at a few of these settings in detail. Back here we're in our demo environment again. And we already talked about some of the key cluster functionality, but we can even go and add an entire cluster and create it using our interface. We'll skip this for the sake of the demo. The next thing that I want to show you is our capacity planning, where here we'll go and take a look at your different utilization across the different key resources, tell you how they're being used, how they're trending, and let you know if we have a recommendation for when we predict that they will run out. It does take a little while for us to calculate and generate the trend lines on this data, so you'll see more information as this develops over time. Next we'll take a look at the optimizer, and from optimizer, which is similar to our distributed resource scheduler or dynamic optimization, we can go ahead and create a group of different hosts or individual cluster nodes which we want to manage. So we'll go ahead and select the cluster in this example. We'll select the first node, and we'll use the default settings. If our performance exceeds these different CPU time, memory, and disk I/O thresholds, we'll go and load balance the resources. So in this case, we'll select node 2, as we have some running VMs on this. We can select the VMs we want to move, confirm the settings, and click Finish. And momentarily, we'll see a live mapping of all of our resources and know the different threshold limitations of when we may want to perform a failover. Finally, we'll take a look at our library, and our library is where we store different resources which we may want to reuse multiple times, such as virtual machine templates, disks, and ISO files. Now we can even take a live running virtual machine and convert it to a template, including sysprep if we want to, giving us a lot of flexibility in how we manage these resources. Once we have a VM as a template, we can hit edit and go and adjust the settings so that we can change this master copy before we go and deploy each time. With that, that's a quick summary of the advanced features which we have as part of 5.9 Manager.
We have StarWind Integration, very important here, allowing us to continue to use 5.9 Manager as the single pane of glass to go and report on the health of your StarWind environment, giving you all different types of alarms, capacity planning, different types of information so that you can see your storage utilization. As Max mentioned earlier as well, we also have integration with Veeam, giving you the ability to view the health of all of your backup infrastructure. And from here, you can even go and start and retry different jobs. So if you notice that there's been a problem with the backup, we can send an alert. From that alert, you can go and retry the backup and try to ensure that your whole backup infrastructure stays healthy as well. Now, 5.9 Manager also comes with an advanced version that includes antivirus. What we've done with antivirus is essentially taken part of our security product, agentless antivirus, and built it into 5.9 Manager. Now, what we try to do with antivirus is we optimized antivirus for virtualization. From here, we can do our fastest scans in the industry. We don't have bottlenecks when we do performance, and we guarantee better security, faster performance than other antivirus vendors on the market. Now, this is important to note. We don't go and build our own antivirus. Instead, we take some of the leading providers in the industry, Bitdefender, Kaspersky, and ThreatTrack, and we leverage their antivirus engines, but we just optimize them for Hyper-V. So it's the same core engine, the same great scans that you're used to getting, but they work much faster in a virtualized environment. Now, the way they work is instead of having to go and install an agent inside each and every virtual machine, as you have to do with traditional antivirus, we actually go and install all of our security at the virtual switch, this purple box in the middle. And this virtual switch is going to go and intercept all of the incoming network packets. So instead of having to wait until that virus gets to the virtual machine itself, we go and block the virus as it travels through the host. So this means that we have an agentless solution. We only install our software on each of the hosts. Nothing has to run inside the virtual machine itself. And this gives you a lot of benefits having agentless protection. The user never sees it. They never have to update their signatures. They never have to run their security scans. They can never disable it. We handle all of the scanning, all of the updating, all of the security at the host level. And if you have compliance needs, this means that the administrators never have to actually log into your guest virtual machines. So maybe if you're a service provider and you need that separation between the administrator and the tenant, you can still offer and guarantee antivirus without having to go and install agents inside the VMs themselves. So great for people that are using VDI or other management components. Now, with our levels of antivirus, we scan and protect at the host. We automatically protect any newly deployed virtual machines. So as soon as you deploy a new VM on that host, you're going to be protected. It's a great best practice. You don't have to deploy the VM, log in, install the security software, and hope that it doesn't get attacked during those minutes. We offer active or antivirus protection on our networks and on our disks, where we have the fastest scans in the industry. Now, as we wrap it up here, hopefully we've shown you there's quite a lot of different components in. And you can see that we've taken all of the best practices around managing your hardware and managing the virtual environment and roll them all into this single unified product. As far as licensing goes, we do licensing consistent with Windows Server and System Center, where you pay per host, which you're managing. We have annual subscriptions, and we also have the Antivirus Edition, which we briefly showed you. Now, as we wrap things off, we are going to do a final poll in just a moment, but I do want to mention these virtual labs here. This is a great way for you to get hands-on with the product. Simply go to 59.com/labs.aspx or find it from our resources tab. And from here, you can go and launch into a live environment where we've actually deployed everything and configured it inside a group of virtual machines. So from here, you can follow guided step-by-step exercises to complete tasks, or just use this as a sandbox where you can click around with all the different resources yourself. So this is going to give you the ability to go and get hands-on with 5.9 Manager without having to go and download, install, or set anything up. Finally, here's several of different resources which we're recommending from both 5.9 and from StarWind. So we are over the hour, but we're going to stay on for a couple more minutes and try to address any questions that people have. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to Max and Alex, and they can tell us, do we have any questions?
Thank you, everyone, for actively participating in the discussion. So the latest question that we just received is related to 5.9 Virtual Machine Agent. So exact question is coming from Alan, and what exactly 5.9 Virtual Machine Agent do, and why it's needed for agentless scanning?
That's a great question. So let me clarify what we mean by the agents here. So what we need to do for agentless protection is we do still install an agent on each Hyper-V host, but we do not require them to be inside the VMs. And what this host agent does is it essentially communicates back with our core management server. So this agent is going to keep track of blocks of data which have changed. It's going to keep track of your virus definitions, your libraries, your antivirus scans. Think of it as kind of the local brain of the operation. And as different network packets go in and out your virtual switch, different type of information is collected with that agent. Now, there is also a more advanced agent that we can go and add. We have what's called a lightweight agent, and that can be installed optionally inside virtual machines if you want to get real-time protection, real-time alerts. And so what we recommend as our best practice is if you have a static infrastructure virtual machine, for example, something like a domain controller, a SQL server, things that do not change, go ahead and install the agent there. It gives you faster responses if there's a virus. However, if you're working with dynamic virtual machines, VMs that start and stop at different time, VMs that are managed by tenants, VMs that administrators do not have access to, we want to go ahead and use the agentless approach with that one. That's going to make it a little easier for you. You don't have to worry about going and installing and doing the management on the per VM level. So you can kind of get best of both worlds depending on what you need for your environment. Is there a question for StarWind?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So we also had a few questions related to memory management and Hyper-V failover capabilities. So one of them was related to capabilities that are available in Hyper-V for failover and disaster recovery support. So if you can just quickly touch these capabilities on Hyper-V platform in general.
So I'm sorry, just in general best practices around...
Correct, for high availability, yes. And
sure. Well, really, but my best practice is go and run the cluster validation tool because that is a single unified tool which has all of the different best practices rolled into one. So what that kind of does, that tool, is it breaks it down into 5 different categories. There's going to be a series of tests around storage, networking, core cluster configuration, inventory, and Hyper-V. And all of these tests are going to go and just run all different components in the environment. It's going to configure everything from your quorum, your disks, your network, number of network connections, whether the correct roles are installed, whether there's multiple IP addresses, IPv4 versus IPv6, tunneling settings, network prioritization settings, boy, and quite a lot more. I think there's over 100 tests now in the cluster validation suite of tools. So to be honest, that's really my best answer. It's really try to work through that set of cluster validation best practices. And that will guide you step by step in successfully building that cluster, making sure that it's optimized.
Thank you, Simon. So with that, we've run over our planned time for another 8 minutes. So I think we're going to wrap up our QA session at this stage. So unless there is a very last-minute question that you want to ask, we are going to thank everyone for attending today's event, and we're definitely going to share the recording with everyone as well as answers to the questions that were asked during the session.
That's great. Well, thank you everybody for attending. On behalf of Five9 Software and StarWind, we very much appreciate the time. We certainly hope that you've learned a lot of different best practices here and dive in to get hands-on with Five9 and StarWind. Thank you. Goodbye.